Good evening. Welcome to the March webinar as part of the Be the Change series. My name is Genever. I'm one of the co-founders of Carbon Calling CIC. We're joined briefly by Nick, the other co-founder, but and she'll be in the background dealing with any questions or anything that emerges. But the main purpose of this evening is myself and Ross talking through the various results. So right at the beginning, we're just going to introduce. We know one another from Create, which is the course we did with Nicole Masters a couple of years ago now. But the images you can see on the screen, Ross, take us through them. It's just a bit of context about where you're from and what you do.
Yeah, so I am hope you can all hear me okay. I'm a third generation cider farmer down in South Somerset. So we've got about 40 acres of orchards, originally planted for Taunton cider. Since I came back from Cirencester in 2018, I've been running those organically, regeneratively, low input. And we've also developed our own sales. So we sell most of the fruit as juice, which is you can see with the harvester and pressing setup. And we also have a bar and tap room, which we sell all our own cider through. So we sell about 10,000 litres a year direct to consumer, and then the rest of the fruit goes to about 30 other cider makers. The photo of the digger bucket is with all the shows our soil. We've got about 300 feet deep, at least, of very heavy clay. So it's quite can be quite difficult land to work with, but yeah, good minerals for the trees. But yeah, so quite wet at the moment.
And is that the main reason it's in trees? It's easy.
No, it's in trees because my grandfather didn't want to have cows, and pigs didn't really work, and it was too small for cereals. So there were good contracts going in the 70s for trees. It's not ideal land for it, but they've lasted 50 years, and it does seem to work quite well.
Oh, nice. And the bottom picture, is that this idea of lots of cover within your trees? So
yeah, so we're very low intervention. Most orchards will keep their orchard floor mowed to a kind of golf course level for easier management. We like to let it grow long, flail it off in July, just really helps with pollinators, insects, soil organic matter, and also just uses a lot less diesel. So yeah, a lot easier.
But I do know that it is mildly frustrating, the mowing job. You do spend quite a lot of time mowing them.
I spend, I would say, all the time. I'm not thinking about apple harvesters, thinking about orchard mowers. I think I've got 3 different mowers now for the orchard specifically, plus various backup options. Yeah, I can see why most other growers just spray off under the trees with glyphosate and keep the alleyway very clean with a mower. It does make life a lot easier, but it's not really very good.
So anyway, so you're the person to speak to about vintage machinery, particularly anything to do with apples, and also like talking about trees, permanent crops. I keep trying to convince you to get sheep. You're not having any of it, or chickens, any livestock.
I'm not a stockman. If anybody knows anyone who wants to, in South Somerset, who wants to keep livestock under trees, please point them my way, because I absolutely hate it. Really not my thing. So yes, lots of mowing. But
more plants. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So that's a bit about yourself. So as some people may have heard my Create story. So what did you do with Create, or how did you find the Create course?
So I heard about it the same way I suspect you did, doing the 2-day courses at Althorpe, which were fantastic. And then I was very lucky to get a place on Create. It was quite, I think we can all say it was quite a full-on 9 months. But yeah, really, really fascinating, kind of taught me everything I'd wanted to learn and couldn't really find elsewhere. Filled in a lot of gaps left by Cirencester. Yeah, just really, really comprehensive. Really, really good. Just kind of still trying to work out what we're going to do with that, and kind of feeling our way through with it. But yeah, no, really, really, really good.
Excellent. Thank you. The word I sometimes use is intense. That's the word.
Yeah, intense. Yeah, really intense. I think I just about recovered from it, and that was 2 years ago.
But obviously you
Approach with caution, I think, is probably safe to say.
met some wonderful people, and they are.
Yeah,
I think they are taking. The next one is Europe, isn't it? The Europe one is starting here in the autumn, so they are
that in?
I'm not sure whether they've decided where, but it's definitely somewhere in Europe is on the next rotation, so it will be coming back autumn 26. So, focus. What we're going to talk about this evening is the Be the Change farmers. So some of you may have already watched the webinar we did in January with Daniel, and that was talking about soil biology. We then did a webinar with Kat from Hutchinson's in February, and she was talking about the nutrient results from these farms. And then the purpose of tonight's is to try and get us a bit of an action plan for those farms. And so it's just useful to know in background is both Alan and Liz were currently in the process of working with Daniel to do a trial on those farms just to see what's happening in terms of soil biology. With Sarah, we're looking to do some work with inoculating muck heaps. So there's work in progress from a Daniel Regenis perspective. In terms of nutrients, we haven't quite got there yet. So this is part of this evening's in terms of just making sure we know what we're up to. So the process is we're going to go through the report. So as I mentioned, if you haven't got the links, put them in, let me know, or I can always send them afterwards. So I went, myself and Nick visited Liz and Alan to do this, and then I went to Sarah's to do this. And Ross and I learned the approach when we were doing Create. So what we'll do for the first 5 minutes is just talk through the assessment that we did, why we did it or why it was useful, I suppose why we were taught to do it that way. But anyway, and then we'll talk through each of the farms. That made sense. So if you've got any questions or queries or suggestions, please put them in the chat thing. The last 10 minutes or so, we'll go through each farm and then identify 3 or so actions that we sort of think are the next steps for some of those farms. Doesn't mean they're having to do them, doesn't mean anything. It could be, it's just a way of summarising what we think we've taken from that sort of assessment. I hope that is making sense. So if we start on this order. So Sarah, arable and sheep farmer from Rutland, not very far from me. And we'll start with her. Then Alan, beef farmer up in Cumbria. Liz, beef and sheep up in Lancashire. So we'll do them in that order. We'll spend a bit more time on Sarah's report purely because we'll use that to go through what the different tests and why we do them. And then we'll go through each of them in turn. Okay, so hopefully you'll see Sarah's transpires. I haven't got all of the details. And so also in the background of here, even though I think there's an occasional wrong one, there's what 3 words. I just need to go and check and make sure they are right. So this is Sarah's farm. Uppingham, if you're familiar, is just north of there. And we basically looked at this. This is one of the fields we looked at. We also looked at this one and this one. I'm hoping you can see a cursor. So we've got Google Maps associating. Not sure it overly helps, but she's north of a reservoir in a water catchment area as well. So that's just for context. Seems to be the word I use a lot currently. So we chose 3 fields to do on each farm. And again, that's what we were taught through the Create process. House paddock, which is permanent pasture, and history is grazing with sheep. Some nutrients, not a huge amount, no reseeding has happened recently. Widow Brown, which is a first-year herbal lay, so ex-arable field that's now in a herbal lay as part of a scheme. Liddington Lodge was in actually winter barley. I'll update it live. And I don't have a drilling date, but that is in winter barley. It's fresh. That's the theme of this evening as well. And then for the soil food web ones that we'll talk about briefly, we then chose 2 other sites. One which is a shrubby area. I always struggle with that word. near the Liddington Lodge field, and the one was under a hedge near the house paddock. And this is a general idea of where we see trees, where there's less disturbance, we tend to see a slightly different profile for the soil biology, which allows us to do some comparisons. All happy so far?
Sounds good.
So let's go to here. So the stage one, so we, in these, let me find a better picture. There we go. So ignoring the fact, it was a very windy day when I did this. So that, imagine that tape measure straight. It was very difficult to do, but this is house paddock. And so Ross, do you want to talk us through how we were taught to do it from this transect?
Yeah, so I seem to remember the idea was you'd basically you pick a pot spot in the field that you thought was a pretty even representation of that field, so not obvious wet patches or near a gateway or where there had been a bonfire or any of that sort of stuff. Mark out, I'm trying to remember how long it was meant to be, 50 meters. And yeah, you do all of your baselining along that transept, and you would consistently do that every year. So rather than the traditional way of soil sampling of zigzagging across a field, with the idea of getting a representative sample of the field, actually every year you're sampling in different spots. So all of you can have variations that are all over the place. Whereas actually, counterintuitively, if you stick to a single transept, those variations, even if they're there, are the same every year. So you can get a lot more consistent results. So yeah, it was using the Soil Mentor app for that, which was, I can't remember now how many they've got on there, 32 different things you can test for. If you do the whole lot, it takes like 2 hours, I seem to remember.
So I did a slightly truncated version of that. So yeah,
I think everyone does.
So this is the start of the tape measure. So the suggestion was also and some of this is also based around holistic management techniques as well. So whiteboard, and the field name, date, and this also is the what 3 words point of where I'm standing. And so the hope is that with the what 3 words, a photo, and you can sort of hope that I sort of lined it up towards a tree in the hedge. So that's where you can go back to the same spot and go, right, this is where I'm reassessing the field. So the ambition for this project, we did this in October, and then we can redo them this October. So it'll be a year since we started. And so as Ross said, working along this, and so that's just to have that in mind. And then what happened, and I'd bring your attention to Roy, my favourite hammer. We inherited Roy. We don't know why he was called Roy, but someone was very proud of him. So he featured because it was very windy. Right. So on that transect, 10 meters from the point where I marked with that whiteboard and Roy, on one side, I hammered in a tube, which was to do infiltration rate. So this is, again, one of the regen indicators. And sorry, there's lots of skipping around and lots of things. So this is the Soil Mentor website. And again, I can put that link in later. And this gives us information about these regen indicators. Soil Mentor worked with Nicole Masters to develop this. So this is why I tend to use this as a way of directing people to ways of looking at their soil. So this sort of diameter of tube, I bought them as small offcuts off online, a steel one, hammer them in. They go down hopefully sort of 5-8 centimeters probably. Then you're pouring in the equivalent of an inch of water, and then you time that to see how long it takes. And then you also pour in a second inch of water and see how long that takes. And what we're doing for this is recording, ideally, how long that second inch of water happens. So that's 10 meters off that point. I did that on one side, and on the other side, I dug a hole and then looked at visual evaluation of soil. So that was the score that the top got, and the depth of which I thought that topsoil was. So that's the score, that's the depth. The bottom score This was rooting depth, which is in centimetres. Nodulation we'll come to on a second. Rhizosheath, insect score, and a worm count. So I also looked at Brooks readings. Again, we'll come back to that in a second. And I also did some along the entire transect. We also took a sample of what was there. So if we talk through rooting depth, basically we're looking for where 80% of those roots are within that soil profile. So this is the centimetres. So not surprisingly, Liddington Lodge, which in this section is the arable field, and it had only been established a few weeks before, that rooting depth wasn't very great. Plus, there was no nodulation. So this is nodules that sit on clover plants. Again, not applicable for this field. But even house paddock didn't necessarily have a huge amount of clover in it, and we'll come on to that in a second. But where the clover was, there was no nodulation. And why we're interested in nodulations is it's a way of understanding if that plant is building a relationship with the soil biology and also helping us fix nitrogen. So again, on the soil mentor, there's a scale. So 0 being very poor, up to 2 being very good. So this is how we're using this score to rate that system. And so that's just a relatively standardized way of approaching it. The challenge always is the time of year. So this was done in October, so we could argue that those nodules were not as happy as they would be when the soils are warmer, but we would like to see something, even if it's sort of scoring 0.5, or 1. Okay, so that's where we are with nodulation. Rhizosheath, Ross, go for it. What's a rhizosheath while I find it?
Yeah, so rhizosheath is the kind of soil that clings to the roots. Basically, when you've got healthy biology in your soil, there we go, finally found the photo. So yeah, they look like, it's much thicker when you pull the soil out. It really grips to the roots. You get a lot more micro hairs on the roots, which hold the soil in to interact with that biology. So basically, they're there as an indicator of good soil biology. And they are often quite hard to find in conventionally managed fields.
And potentially grasslands as well. And albeit it was, when we was doing these samples, it had rained, but sometimes you have to be sometimes careful that it's not dry soil stuck to, like it's a dry bit of soil stuck, don't you? It's this idea that you shouldn't really see white roots. It should have this sort of covering of soil across it. Yeah,
it's obviously in dry conditions you can think, oh look, it's great, it's all sticking, but it's just because it's really dry. And yeah, you can see the white roots, and it's looking for the root hairs. Really, it's kind of obvious thing with the root hairs.
And so it's this site. Have you meant to have disappeared off camera?
No, I don't think so. But it seems to have died. I don't know what it's done. Anyway,
excellent.
The audio is the main thing.
That is true. There we go. You're back. So this idea of sticky stuff, so exudates coming out of those plants. There is carbon in the form of sugar being pumped into the soil. That soil biology is having a small party around those roots, and it's an indicator that relationship is working well.
Yeah.
So I saw a little bit of one in house paddock, but again in the herbal ley field, relatively newly established, and the newly established arable field, again I wasn't seeing much of anything. Insect score is again on a score, on a scale. So 0 being we're seeing quite a lot of bugs. Obviously, this is not a microscope level. This is physically seeing grubs generally, or mealybug type, sort of that like white powdery stuff within soils. So it gives you an indication of where we are from an insect number perspective. Why we're interested is how much, and a lot of these are root feeding. So are we seeing significant issues with the plant because of root feeding insects? And to be fair, until I did this, we were generally not that interested in insects. So it's quite interesting to focus the mind in terms of, and also your identification skills of what it is. So again, 2 fields were 0, and then the more arrow one, we have found something. And then worm count is a physical count of the number of worms I found in a spadeful sort of. So what would good look like? Between that 7 is probably heading towards it, but yeah, obviously a higher number the better. But there was a worm found in house paddock, some found in the Digital Lodge, which is the arable field, and a good number in Widow's Brown. The number of earthworms is always slightly disputed in terms of what we should have. Again, just because we don't have any doesn't mean it's terrible. It just means that we haven't found any in that. But what we can see is as the soils become healthier, it's easier to find them. And also depending on
they're a good, obvious, quick indicator, really.
Yeah,
as a kind of rough thing.
And then bricks reading. So this was using a refractometer. This is an approach that is starting to give an indication of sugar levels within these plants. So we're always taught that it's useful as a comparison, isn't it? So we do grass within that field, we do a weed within that field, we do clover, we do plantain. So we always try and separate out the different species if we've got them. A particular threshold that we're looking for in grass is 10 to 12, clovers 12 to 12 or above. So we're trying to get it above 10, and rarely have I found samples that are above about, for me, generally this is good to get 6 to 8. Most of the time you're down a lot lower than that. I don't know what anybody else has found. We're generally seeing this, we sometimes see it where it is higher in the weeds, but if we're seeing a lot of weed species in those fields, we can sometimes see it higher in those weeds. The best number I've ever got was a thistle flower. Not helpful.
No. But generally, if it's higher in the weeds than the crop you're growing, it implies that something in your field, be that mineral or biological or physical, is much better for the weeds than it is for your crop. So that's kind of where it's useful. Testing the weeds is you can see if they're happier than your crop, you're farming for the weeds rather than farming for your crop.
Casper, you have put your hand up. If you'd like to type your message, that would be really handy. Thank you. Or it could have been an accident. So again, I suppose the hope is it's a relatively quick way of getting a snapshot, isn't it, of what's happening in that field. This is obviously an indication of that one hole I dug along that transect. So it gives us indication, but it doesn't, and helps us make some decisions. But the dream would be that we're using this as a baseline, and then we go back in a year's time and see how that has changed. Hopefully, if we've changed management, or if we've done something different to that field.
And bricks is one of those ones you can just keep doing regularly when you walk through the field, and just keep it in the truck or the buggy and have a look.
Top tip would be Joseph garlic press, because it kills every other garlic press generally. So you end up spending more money on your garlic press than you do on the refractometer that's relatively cheap from Amazon.
I bought one of the clamp ones that, what's his name? Andrew
Raleigh.
Andrew Raleigh, yes. Andrew Raleigh made, because trying to get sap out of apple leaves is really bloody hard work. So I bought one of those at Groundswell. I don't know if he's still making them, but they're pretty hench bit of kit.
I think I've got one of the prototypes.
Liz,
I think they all look like prototypes.
Liz, I think the chat might be disabled.
Oh, that might be an issue.
That might be why it was quite quiet. We were just explaining everything so well that no one had any questions.
I also can't work out how to undisable it right now.
Don't look at me.
Give me a moment. So on that, Ross, while I just do something different for a moment, just talk us through what the sort of techniques you would use on your orchard, or which techniques would you use?
Yeah, so at the moment, I'll be honest, we're not doing a huge amount of monitoring because we haven't been doing any inputs. So we've been doing a lot of management, so mowing, pruning, those sorts of things, but we haven't really been putting on any foliar feeds or compost for the last few years just because of the way the market was. It didn't really make a huge amount of sense to do that. This year, we will probably be putting on some foliar feeds, seaweed-based stuff, might do some biofertilizers, and we will also be putting on some compost at last. So yeah, I will then start doing some bricks readings probably to keep an eye on those and see whether those foliar feeds have an effect. I mean, that's one of the great things you can go through with a foliar, do a bricks test beforehand, spray the foliar, come back an hour, 24 hours later, test your bricks, and you can see if there's been an increase due to increased photosynthesis. Obviously, you've got to be careful that you didn't take your first bricks reading when it was cloudy and then it's sunny the following day. Or your foliar feed had some molasses or something in. So it's not a perfect system, but it's very easy to just walk through the orchard or field, grab a handful of stuff, stick it in the garlic press, and stick it on the refractometer. It gives you a pretty instant reading.
Okay, so to update you, the Q&A is working and the chat we're just working on. So if you've got anything burning, please put it in the Q&A session. I apologise for that. I'm not sure what happened. Mark has found the Q&A, so extra points for him. Does a high bricks reading mean more nutrient in the grass?
Not necessarily. Yeah, generally. So it's not. You're not just looking at the a high bricks reading. It's how blurry or straight the line is. So a nice straight line means you've got a high sugar content, but it's what's the word? It's looking for soluble. I can't remember. But yeah, basically what you're looking for is a high line, but quite a blurry line. Tells you you've got quite a lot of complex sugars and things in there, which is what your biology wants, rather than just simple glucose and things, which you might get from a ryegrass or something. You're looking for a high blurry line is what you're wanting.
But the number is a measure of sugar, isn't it? So it's not all nutrients. It's giving an indication of the sugars within the plant, and also calcium nitrate levels can be indicated from what that line is doing or not doing.
Yes, yeah. So it's definitely not be all and end all. Just because you've got a high bricks reading doesn't mean you're doing fantastic things. Just because you've got a low one doesn't mean you're doing anything terrible. But yeah, it's just a useful indicator as a sort of snapshot thing.
And I think I've had various debates with people about the scientific nature of it, but actually we're just using it as a way of monitoring, aren't we? Or that sometimes I use it in a way of having like a discussion in terms of what's happening within that field. So
it's a tool in your toolbox rather than.
It's not just going, I'm going to make everything decision on that. It's part of what else is happening within that field.
Yeah.
Okay. So also within this is that along that transect line, I went every 50 centimeters and gave an indication of what actually used the end of the penetrometer. What did the penetrometer touch at that point? And so you can see in house paddock that most of what was in that field was grass with a little bit of litter. In widow's brown, which is the herbal ley, quite a lot of grass, some weeds. So from memory, I think it was chickweed, relatively new established, but I need to check my notes. Bit of soil, so bare, and then some litter. And then Liddington Lodge, unsurprisingly, it wasn't grass, it was barley, some litter, and also quite a lot of bare soil. But again, relatively newly established arable field. So the plan with that is, again, this is a snapshot of what I found on that day. So then when we do it again, we can see what's changed over time within that. So this was the infiltration test, which we also did for the field. So the first inch in house paddock 2 minutes, the second inch took 4, 3.5, 7, 2 and 6. So what we're really looking for is how quick the second inch goes in. mainly because that first inch is there to sort of try and ensure that it's equally wetted. Sometimes it is because the soil's amazing. Sometimes it goes really quick because it's found a crack. So it's just quite useful just to, again, a relatively simple technique to use. Can be quite time consuming. So generally the cutoff point is 15 minutes. And you'll see from some other farms, we didn't get to that cutoff point. So it is one of those things to start off as you do all your other things within your soil assessment. So as it's doing its thing, you can be doing something else, keeping an eye on it, rather than sitting there for 15 minutes watching water potentially not disappearing down a hole. So the summary we've got, so we'll do it in a second, but some also, as I was going along that, I was also doing penetrometer readings. So that is a tool that you use to press into the ground, and it tries to standardize the compression needed to get a sharp point through that soil. So it's sort of a measure of resistance, really. And again, we've got, for the 3 fields, we've got where it hits the first point of resistance, and that's at a depth in mils. So that's basically equivalent to about 7 centimeters. The second one is getting to a point of resistance at about 12. And you can see it gets slightly deeper as it goes to those fields. So depending on the soil type and whether you hit stone, like I've got a farm I do some work with, and it's really difficult because they're on chalk to get it in a lot deeper, but we're generally wanting a higher number. Again, it's showing slightly less resistance to depth.
And they measure in PSI, don't they, I think?
So it's, so a higher number. And the reason why the first number is always slightly lower is just because in terms of the amount of pressure that you're having to apply to get through. I'm hoping I made any sense of that.
I seem to remember on them the first number is the point at which roots start to struggle, and then the second number is the point at which roots will stop or something. I can't remember.
Good top tip. So this is the full soil analysis from those farms that we have done before in that webinar, so I won't go through, but they sit in this report that if people can access, as do the soil food web analysis. So you can see for all of those 3 fields we're looking at, really highly bacteria dominated soils. There's some diversity coming in the shrubby area, and again some under the hedge, so yeah, the work that's happening at Sarah's is really to understand what else is going on. Seems peculiar that we're not seeing anything else, so we're just going to have a look further at that. And then these are just some more of the photos. So that's the one we've seen. These are some example soils. So you can see it looks still relatively dry. Bearing in mind this is in a dry year. So there is some crumble happening. We're not seeing a huge amount of rhizosheath, as we talked about, during those roots, albeit a slightly out of focus picture, but those roots aren't overly covered in soil. We are seeing them at depth. We're also seeing this buildup of thatch at the top. So there's quite a lot of organic matter that's not turning around in that soil. They do have cattle on the farm, but cattle aren't on this particular farm. So we are relying on sheep to have animal impact. It's just whether that's achieving. So grazing is one thing we're looking at this year as well. But yeah, reasonable rooting depth, just relatively tight soils. That's again the thatch upside down, so you can see this sort of stems and all sorts that are there. They're just not really decomposing or being broken down. But again, breaks down to generally a nice crumble, which you can. This is Widow Brown's. This is the herbal lay. Again, I can't get my tape measure straight. Roy's back, and so again, this was after a very dry summer, so you can see there's obviously grass is recovering, but there is some bits that have struggled in the dry that are sort of recovering. To be fair, I haven't walked this field since, so it might look a bit different now. It's had quite a lot of wet on it. So there was some herbs. So this is a burnet coming through. I think that's the south thistle, but ignore that. There was some thistles as well. So, but a mixture of forbs, we're going to call them. Soil-wise, probably drier than the first one. Again, you can see slightly sort of more angular clumps, not quite as fine crumb as the one before, but still breaks down into relatively small aggregates. But again, you see these more angular parts, but some of that was because it was just coming out of this very dry period. But reflected in the VEST score of slightly tighter, more angular. This is leading to Lodge, which is the arable field. You can see why my transect did a barley soil concept. So again, litter, barley coming through, infiltration test. Again, not as happy as the first soil in terms of tending to feels like more clay, or it's not that much more clay, but do you mean more clumps, more angular sections?
Just quickly, Liz, what was the establishment method on that barley? How was that put in?
Direct drilled.
Did we know what with?
I have been told. Can I remember? No. I can check. That would be useful in my notes, wouldn't it? I'll write a note about that, Ross. Thanks. But yeah, just again, slightly tighter soils. Again, I'm not sure my descriptions are particularly useful, but we're not seeing that crumbliness that we saw in the other ones. But again, has got a slightly different history. Okay, so that's Sarah's. So is there anything that hits you immediately about that, Ross?
Yeah, so I think the pasture fields are looking, I think that they're, I would say, fairly typical of a sort of pasture field that's got that kind of that layer of thatch, implying that your cycling of organic matter is just not occurring at the rate that you would hope for in a healthy soil. So a lot of you're not getting that carbon cycling through the system and getting the organic matter breaking down to feed the plants to grow healthy plants, to create more organic matter to kind of cycle around. So I think trying to get that on top of that would be a good start.
And it's not, and this isn't meant to be a trick question, but it's not, some of it's a function of grazing or not enough impact, too much rest potentially. Or
yeah, I mean, I like with all these things, it's there's multiple ways in which you can end up at the same sort of results. So yeah, as you say, it could just be a factor of the grazing as much as the biology. But yeah, I mean, they don't look completely. Compaction doesn't look too bad, I would have thought, on the grazed fields. So I've seen worse, I would say.
Helpful. I will come back to that. So
basically, good organic matter is the other thing as well, which is high organic matter. Yeah.
So next up is Alan. So again, we're going to go through this slightly quicker just because we've done through some of the bits. So this, just again, context. So this is, if you're familiar with Autumn, T-Bay, we love a bit of T-Bay services. So the farm is just quite close to Autumn, just off the side of the M6. So this is one of the fields we looked at, and then the other two are sort of, one's in here and one was up here. So it was quite a nice, compared to where we were with Sarah, which was like next to one another, this was slightly more spread around. So for Alan, again, the similar principles is that that's the VEST, so that's the visual evaluation gene, still wasn't a lower number in this regard is better in terms of the score, and then what we want to see is the sort of depth of that topsoil. Rooting depth was good, ranging between 15 and 12 and 18. What I should have said, that's actually the wrong person's report. That helps. That's the right person's report. So that the scores were better than, sorry, this is Alan's report. I was on Liz's report. top soil depth, good. Again, best scores reasonable, rooting depth, good. So look, these are again in centimetres, nodulation present at tarn cycle. So top wood pasture was a permanent pasture field that just had wood pasture put in, and Alan had been doing some rotational grazing through it. Tarn cycle was a hay meadow that was being re-established. So basically it was being cut and managed for hay meadow status. And the wood set stock wood pasture was another relatively newly established wood pasture field, but was being set stock by someone else's dairy heifers, and they were taking it back in. So what we were trying to do is a comparison between management between those two fields. Historically quite similar fields, but had been managed differently in the last sort of 18 months. So what you'd see at the moment is there's actually not a lot of difference between that top one and the set stock one. So rooting depth still quite nice, not a huge amount of nodulation seen, with the exception of that hay meadow. Rhizosheath was present, so we are getting some of this interaction with soil biology happening. Insect score generally low, a bit more activity in the hay meadow one. Worm count relatively low for what I was expecting in these sort of fields. Again, this was done in mid-October. Nick kept swearing at me because every time I went to a worm count, she always found lots of worms. I didn't. Apparently I can't find worms. Brix readings, it was a windier day, a colder day, but we're still seeing slightly lower Brix readings in the pasture versus the weeds. Slightly better for the plantain versus the grass in the hay meadow, and we were seeing low for grass, slightly higher in the weeds as well. So again, indicating that that something else is going on alongside other bits of indication that we're seeing from this table, that there's bits to work on, as there is across all three farms. So then we looked at what was in those fields. So you can see top wood pasture, a lot of grass, little bit of legume, a bit of weed, quite a lot of buttercup in this, some forbs, quite a lot of litter. And so this idea of this organic matter being sort of left on the top and not recycled in. Tarn cycle, which is the hay meadow, a lot of grass, a lot of forbs, a bit of soil, a bit of weed, a bit of legume. So again, more mixed. Again, the ambition of this is to use these as baselines to see what goes on. Wood pasture, we're seeing a lot of grass, weeds and litter. We're not seeing any legumes in this. So there was a slight difference between those two. But again, not a huge amount at this stage. Penetrometer readings, again, we're seeing them at greater depth that we saw on Sarah's. So first one is going down to 15 centimetres roughly, down to 27. And so we are seeing them going a bit further to depth, which relates a bit to what we saw also in terms of rooting depth in that initial assessment. These are the soil nutrient analysis that I won't necessarily go through right now. Just to remind people, we were seeing a bit more diversity from a soil biology perspective in these soils. And then again, we tested a version of wood as well, and we saw some of those fields were similar-ish. So again, a bit more diversity seen here. Fields, so this is top wood pasture. So you can see this was the litter that we were sort of picking up in the transect. It was grass that hadn't been eaten or was being, and this was also being stockpiled for winter. That was part of that. So again, we were capturing this sort of, there was quite a lot of thatch, I suppose, at the top. Again, part of its history of what happened with it, and it's now being sort of, it had been outwintered on. Again, some crumbly, slightly tight, but you can see slightly more crumbly, roots getting down to reasonable depth. Crumble structure coming through, but again, this feeling of tightness. It's a better picture in terms of seeing that sort of organic matter at the top. So this idea of probably more animal impact required, it certainly has had that this winter. But again, we were starting to see some of this rhizosheath, and this was this point of, is it dry soil just stuck to the roots? But you can start to see it in on other places. These root hairs are being covered by soil particles. So this was the hay meadow. So you can see slightly different makeup of sward, a lot more forbs going in it. Generally slightly nicer looking soil, do you mean more crumble within it? Roots at reasonable depth. Oh, this was the insect score. And that was some nodules I found. What I've learned from this is I'm really rubbish at photography. That's what I've learned. You need to check them.
They're fine. They're fine.
I think actually some of this was Nick's because my phone died, so I'm going to blame her.
Okay.
It can't be because she's over there. It must be me taking the photos. Anyway, so this was the set stocked one. So you can see again, very different in terms of what's happening in terms of the sward. Probably that was a worm. But again, it looks a bit tighter than the middle one, but quite similar to the first one, but we're not seeing this build up, a little bit of a build up of organic matter at the top. It's a bit further down, a bit further down. So a little bit of rhizosheath happening in places. Any immediate responses to that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the soil looks quite nice generally. It's got a sort of better colour to it. It's from a basic components point of view, it seems better balanced in terms of having a bit more loam and sand as well as clay. So a good potential base to be working with. I think you shouldn't have too many issues with that. Yeah, as you say, quite thatchy, but yeah, reasonably crumbly. Doesn't look like there's any obvious significant layers of compaction and things in there.
And there's a question in terms of root depth. So generally what we're looking for is the higher the number, the better, isn't it? So in a lot of places we'd be seeing between, I'm hoping for more than 8, but 12 to 15 is going some. And bearing in mind that's where 80% of those roots are. So in this...
Yeah, I mean, it also depends a bit on the crop and what you're growing, obviously. If I had a 15 centimetre root depth with apple trees, I'd be starting to get worried.
Excellent point.
Yeah, but obviously the deeper the rooting depth, the more resilient the crop, the more water and minerals and nutrients it can get to, the longer a dry spell it can survive, that sort of thing. So just deeper the better, really.
There was also a question about nitrogen. On Alan's farm, there is no nitrogen. On Sarah's farm, there would be nitrogen be applied to that arable farm and occasion to that grass, the permanent pasture. So yeah, there is some nitrogen around. There were just some questions I remembered to actually look at. Right. Barry Whistlestop tore through Liz. So this is Liz's farm, Lamb Hill. This is, if you're familiar with Gisborne Forest, is there. Stocks Reservoir is there. So this is in the Forest of Bowland. So yeah, coming in here. So Liz's farm, and Liz and Rob's farm is in here. We looked at fields basically either side of this road. So this one, and one a bit further down from here as well. So all relatively close. And they've done other work. Sort of we avoided anything in their felling allotment. So this was sort of meadowland that we focused on in this one. The 3 fields were here. All of them background was permanent pasture. Some were in different schemes, so wanted to be wetter. Some had both cows and sheep. Some had just cattle. So there was a bit of a mixture in terms of management. Quite a lot of sort of lax rotational grazing. So there'll be animals on it and then moved off, animals off it, but it's certainly not a paddock type system. So, but again, with a range of cattle and sheep at different times of year. So same principles, the VEST scores slightly lower than Alan's would say, but soil depth was good. Rooting depth was high, so 12 to 18. No nodulation seen on clovers, but good level of rhizosheath. Insect score was 0 across all 3 fields, and worm count was low. And it was an overcast day and everything was at 1, so Brooks readings was generally quite low. Then in terms of what was in the fields, this one, some soil, some grass, some legumes, and weeds. Lime kiln, quite a lot of high proportion of grass, some litter, soil, legume, weeds, but again, domination of grass. And fell copy, a high level of grass, litter, soil, weeds, and legumes. So legume is that slightly lighter blue. So again, this is used as a baseline of where we are, quite grass-dominated pastures. Penetrometer readings were higher again, so soil depth was good. In terms of wasn't a huge amount of compaction seen. Yeah, and this is getting to the point of the sort of end of the penetrometer. So again, this is the ones we've done before. Just to remind people of the soil food web, again, high bacteria levels across all, but we were seeing more fungi, more beneficial protozoa across all of those 3 fields. Some of those fields had quite a lot of rush in them, so I just did a sample under a rush and just found it was just slightly different, which was interesting, but I don't know what else to do with that. We also did a wall side and also some under a tree, and you can again see how it varies across that farm. So again, probably more diversity than we'd seen on the other farms from a soil food web perspective. So this was the first field. So you can see this is the one managed for waders. So again, it's a bit different to the field from Rutland, I accept, but so a bit more rush happening, wetter in general. What I should have said on Allen's is the infiltration. We didn't get the first inch, took more than 15 minutes. So I didn't do it for the second inch. So that's what's interesting is the soils. This is why the joy of having a range of things to look at, isn't it? If you looked at just one measurement, you'd go, oh my God. But actually, when you look at the soils, it's quite surprising. The infiltration wasn't happening as we would expect. These soils were particularly characterized by this sort of iron. You could see flecking within the soils. You can also see this buildup of thatch. And I'm going to be an excellent picture of my pen. So you start to see this rusting again, wetter soils in general, but rooting depth still good. Going through them in this sort of crumbly nature happening, and the colour suggesting high organic matter. Again, this indication of wetter soils coming through. And this was a second field, so again, rushes, sort of more sort of buttercups within that sward makeup. Sorry, no, that's still the first field, sorry. Second field, fewer rushes. Quite similar soils between the fields, I would suggest. Probably a little less flecking with iron in this one, but still this really nice crumbly soil, really good rooting depth. Similarly, in this farm, infiltration first inch took longer than 15 centimetres, so I didn't, 15 minutes, I said that last time, so I didn't do the second one. So again, surprising based on what the soils look like. And again, this is the very out of focus rhizosheath ones. I'm telling you, photography is not my thing.
That I will admit that one is not your best work.
If that went to Boots,
you can get the gist. You can get the gist.
That went to Boots, it would have a sticker on it. Just saying. And then this is the third field. So this had been the rushes had been weed wiped and then mowed. So you can see this is the remnants, and that's what pushed up that litter score from before. This was also a wet field. I think that's the standard line for Lancashire, the Lancashire farm. But again, you saw this mottling coming back, and you probably saw this slight build-up of organic matter at the top. The thatch was back again. But again, reasonable rooting, but some of that being weed roots, but still doing a job. And again, this more mottling had come back. Okay, so initial thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, looks obviously grazed pretty tight. I mean, yeah, as you say, the very long infiltration rate sort of seems a bit surprising given the otherwise okay visual nature of the soil. I'd be wondering why your infiltration rate is so high, given that your, just let me scroll back up, penetrometer reading wasn't actually that bad.
No.
So yeah, I'd maybe be looking at actually what was going on with that. Was it not to cast aspersions on your technique of your infiltration rates, but was there something that was being done there differently compared to elsewhere? Yeah.
So it's my fault.
I wasn't saying that. I was just saying that it could be. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with all these things. Sometimes if you get a result that seems anomalous to the rest of your data, it's always worth going back and just double checking that. It's much easier to do that if you've got someone else to do it. You can always blame them. Yeah, as to quite why that result seems anomalous to, say, the pictures of otherwise quite crumbly looking soil. Looks quite nice otherwise. But again, similar to the other two, kind of that fairly, I wouldn't want to say typical of permanent pasture, that low rate of organic matter cycling. Yeah, biology generally looks better though on that soil food web test.
So I think what is always interesting about this project is that we've identified, even though those farms are from different places, that if you then start to look across, so from an iron level, they're all high iron soils, so that gives different challenges. They've all some of them have got challenges with the calcium magnesium levels as well, so we've got common themes.
These ones are all quite low pH, aren't they?
Yeah, so there's some pH queries with the Lancashire and the Cumbrian one, which they're quite surprised, particularly the Cumbrian one, because it's sitting on quite a lot of limestone. So I think what this encourages is that quite a lot of them they all have really the as you said, the framework for really good soils. There's just something that's not quite like needs some tweaks, isn't it, to get it with them really firing, particularly the Rutland soils. So Sarah soils are really high nutrient levels. So just
I mean, it's a good starting point to go from, but it's just general. It implies that it's more of a management alteration needed, as much as rather than necessarily some major inputs or biological inputs. You can kind of hopefully do a lot of work with the management rather than the putting metal in the ground or anything.
So in terms of in the reports, right at the top is I've summarized all the various points, so I'm not going to read them out now, but certainly sort of that idea of, and again, these are available for anybody to have a look at with the link. So we can see in terms of diversity, we can see what's happening from a soil perspective. We've then got, from a soil nutrient perspective, I've broken it down in terms of what's happening. So this high iron's coming out. It could be, we definitely need to think about just checking. What I didn't do at the time was any forage mineral analysis, and so that's probably that is a gap to fix this growing season. Also to combine that with some animal grazing status to see actually where we're in soils we're seeing lower than target for copper, zinc, and cobalt. Do we see that in the animals?
And ideally, you want to do that on the same day you do the soil testing, don't you? So you don't get variations of temperature and water content in the soils. between your two tests, so you can compare them a bit more accurately.
So which I did do incorrectly, but what I'll do this time is do forage analysis, and I'll do some animal bloods to see what's going on. Because also this iron can have this antagonistic effect on quite a lot of minerals that are important, not just for animals, but also for soil biology. So yeah, the soil between those three fields, the nutrients were relatively similar. We're also looking at, and then for source food web, we generally found this sort of higher bacterial levels. So I think the focus for this is on Sarah's farm. The focus this year is to really understand what's happening from a mineral perspective. Sarah is applying particularly trace elements to her arable fields, but not necessarily to her grassland. So we're also going to play around with some ideas about actually getting an understanding of what those grasslands need from a trace element perspective, to see whether any of that amendment may help. And they get this idea of what's happening to the animals. She's previously done quite a lot with gypsum, so we are sitting quite high on the soils. Again, scrolling, we are seeing quite high mag soils in a lot of situations. So there's a potential, particularly on the arable fields, is to play around with some gypsum this year as well. So in terms of this is Alan. So again, same on the reports. I've tried to summarize what's happening on each of those fields at the top. This idea of infiltration is here. And then what we particularly for sort of focusing on, one of Alan's key objectives, see alongside working with Mrs. Blue on the sort of biodiversity perspective, is to really drive grass growth, but without using additional inputs. So we're just really thinking about how we can get that clover working to get the nitrogen going to drive some of that grass growth. So that's probably going to be an area of focus up there. And again, he's involved in one of the Regenis trials. We're seeing, again, high organic matter soils, lower pH, high iron coming in. And we are seeing lower than for copper, zinc and cobalt on most of those soils. So again, checking mineral status, forage mineral status, and also animal mineral status is a priority for the year ahead. And again, the similarity between these fields. And again, this boron and cobalt seems to be a common theme that runs through it. So, but as you said, we're seeing a bit more diversity from a soil food web perspective. So some of the debate we've had with Alan is some of this about patience, that he's only really started grazing that farm differently for the last 18 months. So is this just that we're seeing this in a stage that it hasn't got there yet, but actually in another couple of years it might have changed just through grazing alone? And that's the debate, isn't it, that we have in terms of, do we intervene, or do we just, with the advantage of having stock in the system, are we just patient and use grazing as the major tool?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what you can do with cattle, particularly in terms of grazing and grazing management, and how quickly that can turn something around in a season.
And then this is Liz and Rob. So again, this summary at the top, generally soil structure was reasonable, penetrometer was good. The challenge in both Alan and Liz's is this particular bizarre infiltration rate, which may be a priority to redo this spring to see whether we're still seeing a similar thing. Obviously, when these were done, these areas were wetter last year, and probably Rutland, but I would still be expecting them to be higher than that based on what we saw from those mainly out of focus photos. But this was the one where we were seeing very obvious iron flecks. So the soil again is this high iron. So this is the theme that we've seen across all of the farms. And again, might be an area to focus on pH as well. So And we're seeing, again, some challenges from a trace element perspective with boron and cobalt being challenged. So again, this theme of just having a bit more of an understanding about what's happening with the minerals, both from an animal perspective, but also from a soil biology perspective. Okay, so just slightly over time. So we're thinking sources of information. These reports, if you haven't got access to them, let me know. And they are here. They are drafts. There's bits that need adding in and changing, and a bit more field history needs to be added in. But it is this info snapshot of where we were at the start of the project. And then as we start, quite a lot of them, we haven't necessarily done anything massively different since these were taken, because the winter grazing's happened for some, but some of these fields have been shut up since then. And so the plan is really to set up, or to have a think about what we need to do for this grazing season. So hopefully we can capture some of that change when we relook at them in October of this year. So the bits I'm taking from it is a bit of a focus on nutrient state, isn't it? So tweaks to be made where possible, some to pH. Gypsum may be appropriate, particularly in the Rutland situation. We need a bit of understanding about what's happening with trace elements, both from a plant perspective, but also from an animal perspective. And also that this is just stage one, isn't it? That let's not do a knee-jerk reaction to this and say, oh my God, we need to plough the whole thing up. This is just to say these are 3 fields in a snapshot at the start of a project. And what we're actually interested in is how it changes or doesn't change, or how can our management impact it over time. Anything else to add?
No, I mean, I think you summarised it very well. I mean, I think, as you say, they're not perfect, but there's definitely they're a good. It looks like pretty good base to work from. I think it would be interesting to come back to it, having just changed the management of it, possibly tightening up that stocking density and higher rotation, longer rotations, and that sort of thing. To see how that changed the interaction of those minerals and your biology without actually worrying too much about other inputs in the first place. And then coming back to it, and as things have changed, once you've got the management a bit more where you want it, then sort of coming back and looking at a bit more potentially mineral inputs or that sort of thing.
And I suppose this is the first time, or certainly I've done it. I've done this suite of tests on a handful of other farms, but it's just quite interesting to do it at 3 at the same time that are all in different places doing different management things. And actually, our challenge sometimes is some of the targets are not designed for pasture systems because most of it's been set up for arable. So that's certainly what we're finding from the soil food web stuff. We don't know what those numbers need to look like, or what they should look like or could look like in pasture farmed systems. And similarly for some of the nutrients, we don't quite know what they should be in pasture land. So we're learning alongside everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I think sort of things like the soil pH reading, if you've got good riser sheaths, actually your pH in the riser sheath around the plant root where you're getting all that mineral interaction, your pH can be quite different to what it is in the rest of the soil where you might take your samples. So I think, as with all these things, everything's a tool. It's all individual pieces of data. It's working out how to put that all together to make a decision, and not relying too heavily on one particular thing to make your decisions on, and trying to sort of take a broader snapshot of the whole thing.
I'm going to use the word holistic.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Be holistic about your context, I think, is the, yeah.
Indeed, just buzzword bingo has achieved its house situation. Okay, so thank you for joining us this evening. I know it was a lot of clicking and lots of reports, but there was quite a lot of information to take in. Sorry. This isn't the end. We quite like this approach to sort of talk through what these should look like in pasture systems. So again, as we get more information or as we do more trials on the farm, then this sort of conversation comes back as a more techie webinar. The other thing I wanted to just flag up is that the soil bit will be will be part of the events that are happening on the 3 farms. So this year, we're not doing a conference, we're doing 3 on-farm events, which are linked to these 3 farms. So you can see the dates: 18th of June for Sarah, 24th of June for Alan, and 9th of July for Liz. So we can have a wider conversation about the soils at these events, as well as alongside other things they're doing on the farm, such as habitat surveys. Sarah's going to do some work on family charters, Alan's doing some work on holistic grazing, and Liz is doing some work on tick management. So each of them have their own separate projects happening as well. So thank you, Ross. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
It wasn't too painful. You had, when I spoke to you before, you had sort of forgotten what the concept of webinar meant. So that was exciting. And haven't used
I'm
Zoom.
impressed. I remembered so much from Create. I think, I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
I'm sure Tom was on the call, Tom Fairfax. So
that was quite alarming to discover Tom was on the call, but
he put us right a couple of times.
Always, anyone who's near Tom, go see Tom.
So yeah, Louise has also added that point about are things different because we're now some of this is more habitats than necessarily ashland in a sort of improved situation. So the answer, Louise, I don't know. That's part of what we're investigating is trying to see what is the impact of some of this, and actually can we, by understanding soil biology and that soil food web and nutrients, actually transform into habitats quicker. That's what I'm interested in doing for some of the other work I'm involved in. Anyway, so before I digress again, I'm only 30 minutes over time. Thank you. We'll see you all soon. Bye for now.